Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Kobielska, and I have a huge pleasure to host this, let's say, first opening meeting of our research platform on potential histories of East-Central Europe. And we have a great pleasure to have our guest on site with us in Krakow, Professor Kidron. Welcome once again, and thank you so much for coming. I will start with a very brief introduction about our project, and then we'll follow with introducing our speaker. Then a lecture by Professor Kidron will follow. It will take approximately 1 hour, and then we are supposed to have plenty of time for discussion and all your comments and questions. I should also say aloud that the meeting is being recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, just please don't turn on your cameras. This is to our online participants. In terms of our on-site participants, here we have this, let's say, general camera which shows people who speak. So that's basically how it works. So our project on potential histories is, of course, inspired by influential work by Ariela Azoulay and her book, Potential History, Unlearning Imperialism from 2019. So we may say that we have two focal points here to somehow apply this perspective to our research on East Central European memory cultures that we deal with at the Research Center for Memory Cultures at the Faculty of Polish Studies of the GU. So the first point is this idea of unlearning some things. Basically, the idea is about that we have these crucial concepts or ideas or frameworks of global Western, supposedly universal thinking about the past, the history, heritage, memory, and so on. And maybe, just maybe, some of these concepts are obscuring things that we can observe in many contexts of actual real memory work. For instance, in decolonial context and regions of the world. So the first of the questions we want to ask is about what shall we unlearn in the context of East Central Europe, and what new tools can we somehow introduce in this research context to reveal, and this is the second main point in question, to reveal these alternative scenarios that are not so very well visible in the context of the dominant discourses on history, memory, and heritage, but maybe, again, just maybe, we can perform as researchers this work of potentializing history, memory, and heritage to reveal these alternatives that are suppressed and distorted in the public discourses for years and nowadays as well. And in terms of logistics, we are going to have a fantastic series of lectures by our distinguished guests that will be organized on site in a hybrid form or online in some cases. So we very much invite everyone to join us during our subsequent meeting that we will be informing about. And so now, this is for what's happening right now in here. Let me introduce Professor Kidron, who is Associate Professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Haifa in Israel. Professor Kidron has undertaken comparative ethnographic work with Holocaust descendants in Israel and children of Cambodian genocide survivors in Cambodia and in Canada. Her interests include personal and collective memories, especially Holocaust and genocide commemoration, She has also examined the localization of Euro-Western discourses on memorialization, justice and reconciliation, victimhood and trauma in the context of Cambodia, while exploring sites of friction in the contact zones of local global encounters. So if I may add, we are very excited to start our common collective thinking about East Central Europe with a lecture on Cambodia, because it shows here that this idea of searching for potentializing context, comparative links, multi-directional relations can be very, I don't know, viable, vivid, and maybe lead us into new contexts and perspectives we would like to revisit somehow together. So, Carol, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for coming, and we are excited to hear your lecture.
Thank you so much. I thank my many hosts who invited me, who spoiled me, and generously took care of me, and for the wonderful conversation this morning that was very fruitful for me. Okay, so I admit that my PowerPoint is very full of texts, and I have a lot to say, and I often don't have enough time, so I will try to limit myself, but I ask you all, if I speak too quickly or if anything I say is unclear, feel free to stop me and to ask questions, okay? So just to give you the background of this particular project on Cambodian memory. So in the past, I did a comparative study of the legacy of Israeli Holocaust trauma descendants, how children of survivors of the Holocaust in Israel experienced their past as traumatic or not, and comparing their silence and perception of victimhood or trauma, comparing their sense of trauma with Cambodian descendants in Canada and in Cambodia. I began with Canada. I was fascinated by the fact that they were Buddhist, that they had experienced a genocide, and I had heard that they were also very, very silent, like the descendants of Holocaust survivors in Israel. And my findings in Canada with the children of Cambodian genocide survivors in Montreal and Toronto was even more surprising than I could have imagined. I was told in 2006 through 2010 that they were not interested in genocide memory, and very, very different than the Israeli experience relating to Holocaust. They said that Buddhism calls for acceptance of the difficult past. They wanted to put it behind them. They were interested in forgetting, as going as far as to say forgetting. And they said that according to their cultural and religious heritage, too much thinking about suffering according to Buddhism, the way they saw Buddhism, would cause suffering and illness and bring the evil back into their lives. When I met a monk for one of my most dramatic moments in my field in Canada, a monk in Canada told me, when I asked, why doesn't his Buddhist Wat or temple in Canada teach genocide memory on the Sunday school to Cambodian Canadian young children? He said, I would never bring evil to their present. I want them to forget. And when I said, but Israeli Jews take children to Poland to understand the Holocaust past and not to forget, so would you take kids to Cambodia from Canada to show them the genocide sites, the killing fields? And then he said, Jews' bad memory or bad education. And this was to me fascinating, and only brought about this fascination and interest I had in cultural differences, different local experiences of genocide, Holocaust, and also made me wonder, of course, about Buddhism compared to Judaism or Judeo-Christian understandings of memory. So my new question after going to Canada was, will the Cambodian nation state exhibit the same Euro-Western forms of genocide memory? In other words, perhaps Canada is a Cambodian diaspora. Perhaps they're interested in becoming Canadian. Maybe that's why they want to forget. Maybe they're not as Cambodian anymore. Maybe they've acculturated to Canadian society. And my sense was that Buddhism would have an impact in Canada as well as in Cambodia. And I would see the impact of Buddhism calling for a forgetting of the past in the same way as I did in the diaspora. So the question was, will the Cambodian nation state exhibit the same form, excuse me, of a desire to forget? And will they say, as they did in Canada, that Buddhism calls for forgetting? So between 2011, and I should have updated this, I've been doing this now for 12 years. I'm obsessed with my research questions. They never end. I've been to Cambodia 8 times for between 1 to 2 months of fieldwork. So in this lecture, I will focus on what are called in Asia, also in Thailand and in other parts of Asia, stupas. So these are memorial monuments for the dead. Soon we'll discuss what kind of dead, but what you see here are genocide memorials that are inspired artistically, architecturally by traditional memorials for the dead in Cambodian Buddhism. But you see there the skulls of the genocide inside these monuments. So I was fascinated after interviewing Cambodian descendants of the genocide. I discovered they too want to forget the past, and they're not interested in collective national memory. But then I discovered, that part of my research was closed more or less, that I discovered this desire for forgetting. But then I discovered these fascinating sites across Cambodia. These aren't museums, these are villages all around Cambodia. And I started to do field work. In other words, hang out at these sites, waiting to see who comes to commemorate. I remind you, it's a Buddhist country, so they have practices of ancestor worship, lighting incense for the dead. I expected to find people. So I spent days and days at multiple sites, and I was shocked again, no Cambodian visitors, just a few tourists. And finally, a young girl shows up at the site, and I'm all excited. And I'm talking about this particular site, Wat Semrong Battambang. This is a city about, if I'm not mistaken, an hour and a half from Phnom Penh, or 2 hours, depending on how you get there. And we'll talk about this site at length soon. So I asked the young girl who finally shows up all excited, hello, you were the first person to come here all day. And I see she's taking notes. And I said, well, I'm also taking notes. Why are you here? And she said, I have to write a report for school. On what? Tourism. So of course you see, is this a tourist site? Why is she there? And why tourism and not something else? So I asked her, what do you think of this monument? And she said, important to show so you can believe, important never again happen. So you can recognize the Holocaust model of never again, important to show. We can talk about that later in the questions. And then I asked her, did you ever come here before? Because I wanted to know if she commemorated with school, with friends, with family. And she said, no. I asked, did your family come here? Your friends? No. Why? And then the answer is important. It's for tourists. Baran is the Khmer word for tourists or foreigners. So a site only for tourists in the middle of a village where I can promise you maybe 10 tourists a year will arrive at the site. So the question, sorry for the cutoff, when Theravada Buddhism in Cambodia calls for monthly ancestor veneration or worship, why are the monuments of the murdered? I don't know why this slide did this. It's not the first time. Here it is. why are these monuments of murdered ancestors left unattended? So this is, again, after months of hanging out and going to multiple sites. And of course, later I asked the villagers, why don't you light incense? Why don't you pray? There are prayers for the dead in Buddhist culture. Why aren't they doing this? Why are they for the Baran? So between 1985 to 2016, and this needs to be updated because I would say now there's about 130 or 40 stupas or monuments for the genocide. So this is an enigma. Why are they being constructed when the Cambodians are not using them? The bones of exhumed dead are on display. I want to emphasize that most villages either threw the bones in the river of their genocide dead or gave them, collected them and gave them to government or NGO officials. So in some sites, these bones were being purposely exhumed, taken out of the ground in order to place in these monuments. The monuments are designed, and this will be one of my main claims today, syncretically. What does this mean? That there's an attempt to combine, if you see this, I'll show you the site again, Buddhist aesthetics. You can see the Naga dragon, the white color of mourning, and the base, as I will show you later, is this creates the sitting position of the Buddha that you can see in ancient monuments around Angkor Wat. And it very much looks like, if you look on the right, a traditional family stupa or monument for the family dead. There's a hint in what I say, family dead. So that is one side of it, but also I'm claiming today that there's also a Euro-Western commemorative design, which I know some of my interesting scholars today asked critical questions about this, and I'm happy to hear more critical questions. So when I claim that there is a Euro-Western design, the claim is, which you'll see soon in other pictures, that the idea and the practice of displaying atrocious dark tourism or death on display, it has become the Holocaust model for commemoration, to create identification with tourists or visitors, and to create prevention pedagogy, to teach the horrific past so that we might prevent the same past in the future. So we will discuss this as we continue. So if the monument has been designed to combine Buddhism and something new that is a Holocaust model to become a more global, I hope you know the term globalism, to combine the local with the global. Why isn't this working? Why are there no visitors? So there was an attempt to make this, if you think of McDonald's, like the McDonaldization, so that every country has a local design of McDonald's. They are creating some kind of McDonaldization of these memorials. Why aren't they working? So what is my hypothesis, my critical hypothesis? Although these sites are designed as hybrids, meaning in keeping with something local that the population can relate to, and at the same time combining new aesthetics that will create prevention of future genocides, I'm trying to claim that these practices are in friction or contradict the local Buddhist perspectives. And there is something about this contradiction or being out of tune, what I call a failed translation, that is making these sites not viable, not usable, and mostly not meaningful to the local population. And then the question is, if they are not doing the memory work at these sites, are they really memorials? Is this a site of memory when nobody's going there? Yeah. Okay, so a little bit of scholarship. I tried to cut it short, not to take up too much time with the theory, but some of it is relevant for my claim. So the early theory around collective memory was that the nation state or a hegemonic ethnic group in every society is creating collective memory or a national memory. However, in late modern theory, we begin to see in the theory and in practice, perhaps, that in the West, for sure, but not only, we see a globalization of what was national that becomes transnational memory. And now the question that I want to ask today is, so how does a transnational memory emerge? How can I create a genocide model that's universal, that can speak to so many different cultures with different cultures of memory? And we understand that there are national and ethnic particular memories and particular ways to remember. So how will this allow for these two agendas to maintain a particular way of memory so that memory works, that monuments aren't empty or unattended, and at the same time to bring about some kind of language of prevention of conflict, genocide, future Holocaust? How do we do that? Yeah. So one, we know the term globalization, that something that's global can mix with something local to make it viable, to make it happen and work. However, there have been optimistic statements by Levy and Schneider in 2002 that claim it's not just a mixture. There's actually a third language, like hybrid, yeah, that can combine so successfully that we all in the world, this is like a dream come true, that all of us in the world, if we're sensitive to local needs, we can create one cosmopolitan Holocaust memory. And I personally, which we can talk about afterwards, I'm very critical as an anthropologist if we can respect the local enough and understand it enough and adapt the global in order for perhaps that language to work. And I'm not very optimistic about it. I don't mean that I don't believe there will be hope for no conflict, but I believe that these hybrids are a very challenging agenda. And and for me, I'm already jumping ahead. These hybrid monuments are very much an example of this attempt at one global language that combines the local and the global. And my claim is they don't work. Yeah. So my first question theoretically is, what would a language of memory that's universal look like? And my claim is, based on the memorials that I am familiar with around the world, Holocaust has created some kind of model that I claim, and other scholars, we can discuss who they are later if you'd like, have discussed what this language or model of commemoration looks like. So the first aspect of it is death on display. Dark tourism, I'm sure you're all familiar with this. The idea of death on display, such as human remains or bones, it could be photographic images, or it could be actual bones, as we just saw, and we can discuss that. These are images of suffering, and that's why they're on display. And why? First, we want evidence of the genocide that's unrefuted. But as scholars have discussed, the idea, why would we want to be shocked? Why do we need evidence? Of course, justice, global prevention, but also shock, visceral reaction. We understand that we want people to believe, to feel identification. And we have scholars like Nora and later Rachel Hughes, who have discussed the concept of duty memory. We have to create citizens of the world who share a duty to remember. And we claim that we must shock and move people to create identification and this sense of duty. Otherwise, the assumption is people will not want to prevent vengeance, violence, conflict. So we have a new idea, this term idioscape, which is, I think, a very fruitful term that refers to the way in which ideas can travel with images or with sites of memory, because there's a kind of urgency when we go to these sites. The nation and tourists are working through these difficult experiences, and they eventually understand from this shock and identification that is essential for the world after World War II, for sure, to reach some kind of prevention pedagogy, to teach people to have reconciliation with those who are their enemies, to create peace, justice, prevention. And of course, we have the whole move towards global human rights, which, again, I want to emphasize, sites of memory as a global language have become a new kind of way, and we will have some literature on this as well. If once upon a time, transitional justice in human rights was the way in which ideas about justice were spread, now memorialization becomes the new hope for prevention. So I just want to say a few to see if everyone here is on board with these terms. Localization, I'm sure you all know, it's the way in which global ideas are adapted to local needs. But I wanted, and hybridization, I'm sure you understand that when you create a hybrid, there are always issues of power relations. So if I go into Indian reservation or First Nations reservation, and I create a hybrid ritual that's global and local, of course, who is determining what that hybrid is? Who is designing it? Is the two versions of hybridization equal, or is it organic? Who created it? Is it coming from below, from the people in everyday life, or are there leaders or elite who are determining the hybrid? But I want to focus, because this is important for my final conclusions, on the term friction and the way Singh uses this. So whoever has not read her books, I recommend them. So Singh has a metaphor in which she discusses globalization, and also the idea of progress, which I would like to critique today. So she uses the metaphor of friction, and she says, globalization is like a wagon rushing on a difficult territory, driving, and the wheel hits the road. Of course, it creates friction, and that's difficult. However, the friction doesn't only create a problem. The wheel hitting the ground also allows for the wagon to progress. So this is a very important idea. So she claims, if we go to Cambodia and we impose a Holocaust model of commemoration, we impose globalization, and this is what she writes about, not in Cambodia, other forms of globalization and localization. She says it's okay if there's tension and lack of acceptance in the beginning. The wheel hits the ground, there's tension, friction. That friction creates energy, and eventually the wagon will proceed or progress. So I'm sure all of you have studied some kind of post-colonial theory. I am critical of this idea that progress depends on this initial tension, as if we are legitimating this wagon hitting, the wheel hitting the ground, and then it's okay. And she speaks about villagers and local people suffering and being, limited by globalization, because eventually the wagon will move forward. So my last question, which will be my final point for the lecture today, is who is driving this wagon in Cambodia? Who is driving globalization and deciding that the friction of the wheel is important enough for the Cambodians to become global and to learn this new language of commemoration? So I think I will move forward to save some time. And my question, which is obviously full of an agenda of critique of these kinds of global memorialization projects, can you force another nation or culture to remember suffering? Because essentially, Cambodians want to forget, and they're being told, build these monuments, remember, identify, and everything will be okay, and we'll prevent a future genocide in Cambodia, and you'll progress towards the global language of peace, justice, and education in general, yeah? So can we force them to memorialize like this? So now there's like a logical trap that I think is very interesting. If global peace, according to this model, depends on conflict management and reconciliation, and memorialization is claimed to be the way to prevent conflict, and it's a human right, then if a country or a people say they don't want to memorialize, then failing to memorialize is a human rights violation. So again, the world, the Western world, such as people in the UN and those scholars, Bluestein, Khazan, Mistal, and Donnelly, claim that we need memorialization in every country with post-conflict in order to prevent future conflict. And memorialization is the way to do it. And it is a human right to memorialize. Then the world, that people who do not wish to memorialize have a human rights violation, and the world is destabilized because there's a country that doesn't want to learn from the past, which means they might be the next war. And the answer of Khazan, for example, at the UN report about global memorialization is that the global community can force a post-conflict country to memorialize. So I find this very interesting, and I haven't really worked this out completely, but I think it's worth our time. So just more terms and perspectives in anthropology, which is my field. Originally, human rights intervention was considered salvation, liberating the victims. There are other perspectives that critique humanitarianism and say, in some ways I do, that it's a new form of imperialism, and humanitarianism can be and may not always be culturally competent. But this is a more optimistic statement that humanitarianism could be made culturally competent. And some people are just pragmatic and saying, well, globalization is inevitable. Let's just try to make it grassroots and organic. So my critique is that in many ways, public truth-telling, testimony, public remembrance is a global axiom, and we are imposing this global process of testimony on local modes of memory that simply do not necessarily fit the model. Okay, and we assume, one last point about trauma, that if people are silent and they're not commemorating, we assume they're traumatized because they're not able yet to testify, they're not able to voice or to work through. So again, the question is there another way to do memory work that doesn't require testimony, that doesn't require that people work through, that doesn't require public memory? So my question is, just very quickly to move on, has a cosmopolitan Holocaust model of genocide commemoration traveled, I'm sure you all know that the term, traveled to Cambodia globally? Maybe it's not the Holocaust model. Has a global hybrid form of memory, emerged on the ground in Cambodia. I claim that these monuments are a global hybrid form of Holocaust and Cambodian memory, forms of memory. And of course, does it work? And I want to claim, when I say does it work, commemoration should be a meaningful way to make the past present. So it's not enough to say, is somebody standing there? Because in Cambodia, sometimes NGOs, foreign NGOs and local NGOs forcefully take the villagers in vans to stand by national memory monuments, and then they are filmed, they are sent to the NGOs abroad, and money is donated. So I'm not asking if people are attending national memory ceremonies. I'm asking if they are attending, not like these hybrid small monuments, is it working in a meaningful way? Does it speak to them? Will it really prevent the future conflict? So my methodology in 2 words. I'm an anthropologist. I go to the field. I do in-depth, semi-structured interviews, which means I always have the same questionnaire, more or less, which I know by heart by now, of course. And it is adaptable, which is why it's semi-structured. I've interviewed, oh my gosh, at this point, probably at least 200 survivors, another 150 second generation, informal interviews, many informal interviews. Memory agents include everyone who has been working on memory in Cambodia, Cambodian NGOs, foreign NGO workers, monks. These monuments are often on the land of monks and blessed by Buddhist monks, which is a huge question. And of course, government culture ministry, where they plan everything that should be planned around memory in Cambodia. Do I need to go through the history of the Cambodian genocide?
I think more or less.
Yeah, I mean, 1975, Cambodian communist Khmer Rouge undertakes agrarian revolution. Their agenda is to free the peasants from subjugation of what they described as the Cambodian elite, which is educated Buddhist religious monks and also foreigners, but also very educated Cambodians and everybody who wore glasses, literally. Definitely urban population was then displaced to the agrarian parts, rural parts of Cambodia, and forced to work. 1.7 out of, I think, 9 million people were killed or died, worked to death, starvation, illness. In 1979, the Vietnamese troops liberated, but Cambodians call this occupation, liberated Cambodia from the Khmer Rouge government. It's extremely important for me to say that after the Cambodians were given their government back from the Vietnamese, many of the Khmer Rouge perpetrators remained in the Cambodian government until this day, which creates a lot of political issues within Cambodia, lack of trust. Some scholars speak of this as an auto-genocide because the Cambodians were killing one another. But of course, there was massive global intervention, China, Russia, America, and many Cambodians blame the geopolitics and say we didn't really kill each other. It was all foreigners that forced us to do anything. It wasn't really the Khmer Rouge. And today, perpetrators and victims live side by side in villages. They just went back home because you had many, many young people who joined the Khmer Rouge and killed their village, members because they were either forced or they agreed to do this. Okay, so national narrative, which I'm sure you understand this politics of memory. The government constructed a solution not to be able to kill half or to test to indict or imprison half of the population that were Khmer Rouge. So the solution was to take a clique of Pol Pot or Khmer Rouge leaders and to there was a trial, the Nuremberg in Cambodia, and these people were, imprisoned or killed, and they were the ones that were the symbolic gesture of justice for Cambodia. So Cambodians have a few national memorial days that the population, the mass population in Cambodia, reject these memorial days because they don't want to remember, but also because they feel this is government enlisted politics of memory and a scare tactic to scare them into passivity, and because there is government propaganda constantly in Cambodia saying, if you don't vote for our regime, there is no democracy in Cambodia to this day. If you don't vote for us, we will have more skulls. And this is on election day. You have a picture of the monuments with skulls, and it says underneath on television, national television, vote for us, because if not, you will never have peace and only bones. Okay, so you can understand how what that might mean. We have a national genocide museum, S21. It used to be a school. Here you see right after the end of the genocide, all of the skulls that were taken from the villages and from the killing fields were displayed in order to receive acknowledgement from the the global community, and to receive funding. The country was falling apart in major chaos. Here you see inside this national museum, which is extremely difficult to go to and very, very morbid, atrocious representations, very, very little high technology commemoration. You see a map of Cambodia with literal real bones, which only recently the Yad Vashem, or main genocide archive of Cambodia, demanded that the bones and this map be taken down because it's disrespectful for the dead and is very inhumane to have that on display. But you have torture equipment on display. These are small cells where prisoners were held, and these images, there has been a lot written in culture studies, psychology, anthropology, museology about these images of prisoners. Everyone, I think, except two or three people died in those cells or were tortured to death. Here you see where they were held, more images. Well, okay, the second site, and I'm going to be done in 1 second with the landscape of commemoration in Cambodia. Here you see the killing fields. It's the second very famous site. What's important in the killing fields is this really was a killing field. There are bones scattered everywhere, and which is very extreme and interesting for us to think about, that they went out of their way to keep pieces of bone everywhere so that visitors would see them, even though there's some rope around certain areas. And there's a whole other question of why they would do this, and they see this as evidence, and they want acknowledgement, and they also are interested in global support. And this to them is seen as the correct model of global commemoration. Especially perpetrators are expected, as they understand it, to acknowledge and to commemorate, so that there might be justice, reconciliation, forgiveness, and again, global renewed support. So here I'm finally back to the stupas. This is the first genocide monument built at the killing fields. What's interesting, you can see a huge section in the middle. The entire tower is a collection of bones, human remains, and they are organized scientifically as far as they understand. This is what they told me. It's scientific because every shelf is another part of the human body. And you can see the same design we spoke about, the base that goes up. It's the sitting Buddha, the Naga dragons on top. And inside, we will see other traditional sites that have remains and ritual performances within. So I want to just quickly say, looking at these sites and also at the museum, what is congruent or what fits the Holocaust model of commemoration? So we have death on display to the extreme. Evidence of authentic evil for a lesson, for shock, for pedagogy. We have images of vulnerable victims and empathy. We have little or no historical texts because the idea is to create more pathos and a dialogue or identification. But I just want to say, until my research, there was no interest in the literature on how Cambodians visited these sites. Were they going to these national museums? Did it speak to them? Was it meaningful? Absolutely nothing. The only interest was atrocity tourism and culture studies analyses of, you know, the power of testimony, the power of voice, the power of representation of suffering. And there was no ethnography. So I'm finally getting to my site and to my claim about the site. So if you look at this site in Wat Samrong, this very complex, in my opinion, stupa or monument. So at first glance, because this is what I'm going to be doing almost until I'm done today, I'm going to ask with you, in what way is this a culturally suitable hybrid that might meet Buddhist and also Holocaust Euro-Western aesthetics or sensibilities? And of course, then ask, if it does suit, why aren't people attending? Yeah, why aren't they interested? We've adapted it, McDonaldized it. So we see bones on display. We see even some text that talks about suffering and how many people died, and Cambodian remembers the difficult past. We also have the base. If you look with me here at the base, the bas relief below are full of very extremely difficult images of atrocity. You see people being beaten to death. You see someone being boiled or pushed into oil, like a vat of oil. You have here, it was common, terrible, people using palm leaves to decapitate people. And worse for me to look at is rape in this bas relief. So that's my first reading of atrocity, identification, death on display. But how is it Buddhist? How is it Cambodian? So if we look with me here, this is from Angkor Wat, 3 monuments, and it is early 1000 something, and we have early Buddhist monuments. This is the same shape as the genocide memorials, sitting Buddha, the door, which is equivalent in my view in some aesthetic architectural means, stairs going up, which you did see the stairs at Wat Samrong, and inside these rooms or spaces, you had ritual ceremonies with remains or holy objects, yeah? And the assumption was that this is where one could pray to Buddha and pray for the dead as well. So that's one thing. Second of all, bones, we asked, but there weren't human remains inside those traditional memorial monuments. So here you have in Sri Lanka a stupa memorial for the Buddha. And here you have, they claim, Buddha's bones inside. So perhaps putting bones inside is acceptable. Now I move on to Cambodia again. These are family stupas. And what do they contain? The human remains of 8 generations back of family members. And what happens at these family stupas? This is a wat. They cost about $1,000, which is a huge amount of money. But families rent this space from the Buddhist temple, from the monk. They spend $1,000 on these stupas, and they go there regularly, monthly, to exchange with their dead family inside, asking for blessings and giving blessings. So there are remains of the dead inside. So you must say, look at these stupas. They look exactly like the genocide monuments. So this is a great globalization of genocide memory, because it's exactly what they know how to do. Family who does not have money for the gold stupa, $1,000, can build a small stupa for $100 on their land, and they regularly go visit their dead. And as we discussed this morning, here is the bas relief at Angkor Wat from the year 1000. Beautiful bas relief image of a battle in early Cambodian history. And here we have the dancing girl, traditional apsara, another amazing bas relief. So I might say, looking back at the image, this is an amazing global object, because here you have a bas relief applied to the representation of genocide atrocity. So this should speak to them. This should be meaningful to them. Okay, so now I will give you my answer of why not. Okay, so it appears that it's successful. So I asked, so why isn't it working? So here are my answers after many years of research to tell you why this hybrid is a failed translation. So look at the red. So first answer is that the function of traditional stupas, those gold stupas or the little cheapy one, is private only for family. And inside the stupa is only my family. And what do they do there? They visit, they bless, and they speak to their family members who are present in the stupa, and they expect to get blessings, okay? And then you might say, okay, they are human remains. But the answer to that is that the contents of the family traditional stupa is not the bones of the dead, but cremated dead, burned at the ashes of the dead. And these ashes are essential. The cremation, according to Buddhist practice and animist Buddhist Khmer practice, one cannot move on to their next reincarnation or to nirvana unless they are cremated to free the soul. And the popular understanding of cremation and reincarnation is that if a soul is not burned, if the body is not burned, the soul becomes very, very angry and dangerous to the family particularly, but also to the village. And people become sick. So the worst thing cosmologically in Buddhist tradition is to not burn your family's body and allow them to move on. And once you put the ashes in your stupa, that's when you can maintain a present relationship with the dead that helps the dead and helps you, and your family can remain healthy. So where do we see bones in collective performances or monuments in Asia? Only the Buddha. or the saintly monks, powerful monks, divine spirits, can withstand not being cremated. They are so holy that they will not become violent spirits, angry spirits, and be dangerous. And even the divine monks have a limited period, like milk going bad, that if you leave them out in these spaces for too long, they become angry and dangerous. And I would add again that another purpose I emphasize here, that the purpose of the stupa is to exchange merit with the family, and it sustains relations. It is not about the Holocaust, the genocide past. When I interviewed people about their family stupas, I asked them, what do you think about or talk about when you go to the family stupa? And they would say, we talk about our problems, we ask them to help us, we ask them if you're happy, we give them our favorite food. So I said, as a Jewish Holocaust memory-obsessed person, I asked, do you think about the genocide? And the answer was no. Why would I think about the genocide? The genocide's over. And then I would ask again, I asked people who had family members who killed in a car accident. And I asked, do you think about the accident? And the answer was always, why would I think about death? And when I asked my informant, one of my first informants, about what do the people think about or feel about the ashes? And he said, we leave them food and we believe that they eat them and it makes them happy and they bless us. So I asked, but the food is there. This is like the Western silly question of, but the food is there, right? I mean, they don't eat it. And the answer was, it's like an email. You send an email, but it's in your inbox. It's still in your inbox. So in other words, the relations, is about creating this exchange in a very interesting, culturally specific way. But now going back to the theories of memory, and this is very important for me, when we as Westerners visit a memorial or a museum for genocide, Holocaust, we believe that the past is absent until we visit. We visit to make it present and to feel that we are actually remembering and making something that might be forgotten present. And what are we making present? The historical event, as long as we are there. When we leave, it's gone. So we make something that's absent temporarily present. What do the Cambodians do when they visit their family stupa? They are always in interaction with the dead in the present, and they're not in interaction with a historical event. And this is critical because for them, memory of the distant historical event, if it's a bad event, is terrible, dangerous, unhealthy. Also, their concept of trauma is about moving away from PTSD, from a traumatic event, to save yourself, to keep yourself healthy. Okay, so my claim is, and soon I'll just go to a conclusion so that I keep to my 6:15 is okay?
Yes.
Okay. So my claim is that these memorials are failed aesthetics. That in a way, if you think about the bas relief with the military and their pride in their history, what does it mean to take the same aesthetic style and art form that was 1,000 years old and make it into rape scenes? So my question is, isn't that sacrilegious to use the same media, to present something so atrocious that people want to forget? Another point, if you saw, there's English text on the bas relief. In other words, who is this site for? So are we who's lying to who about the purpose? If it's really for tourists, it's in English. So why are they saying that this is a Cambodian site of collective memory when the collective doesn't want it and doesn't understand the process of remembering the evil past of death and atrocity? And then the big question is, most of the Cambodians I spoke to, and I didn't have time very much to talk about my interviews, it said to me that the first collective stupa was built by a Vietnamese who occupied Cambodia and wanted them to understand that the Cambodian people had created such chaos and such evil inside their country that Vietnam had no choice but to occupy and control, or, which we didn't talk about this yet, it was the NGOs from around the world who are forcing them to do something that they weren't interested in, they didn't understand. So the last point on this slide is very, very important, that you have many, many elite in Cambodia, in NGOs, in the government, in local and governmental NGOs, and of course the government itself, who actually need to bring in foreign money because the Cambodian government does not have any social welfare. So in Cambodia, all social welfare comes from foreign money and NGOs. So the idea of these sites has always been for Cambodia to try to copy what they believe we see as collective commemoration of a genocide, make Cambodia look progressive. And it's not for the Cambodians at all, but they have to look as if they are teaching the Cambodian villagers all about genocide prevention. And the ugly side of politics of memory in these countries is that these NGO leaders have huge salaries. And I would add quickly, because it comes at a later slide, but we won't have time, that the young people who are between the ages of 22, 23 to 35 come from poor families in the village. 80% of Cambodia is extremely poor, no income, bad agriculture, no government support. Young people learn English, they get jobs in NGOs, and the NGO teaches them to build stupas, to teach the villagers about collective memory, to open schools, to teach liberalism, liberal perspectives about peace and prevention. And these young people have the first salary ever in their families' lives, and they are becoming urbanized, like metro kind of young urban people who are progressing in reality. And these people are also climbing the ladder of modern life for the first time based on these humanitarian interventions. You have monks who receive kickbacks, meaning they build huge construction projects, sometimes to build 2 stupas on one site. You have kickbacks because the NGO, which I haven't said yet, the NGO is paying to build these stupas, the foreign NGO, and they usually give much more money than one needs for cheap construction workers. And who is taking the kickback? It's the monk. And sometimes one might claim that there might be kickbacks also. This is something I heard in July when I was in Cambodia in August, that also NGO workers from around the world have projects and they need money for projects. So they're not pocketing this money, but if the project costs less than what the NGO, gives for this project, so suddenly the stupa can cost $1,000, the NGO gives $5,000, and now we have $4,000 for another project. just to give you a feeling of why it may not work. So I asked the survivor, did you ever go to the stupa at Wat's in Rome? And she lives nearby and she goes to the Wat all the time, to the temple. No. Why? Why would I go? Did your relatives die in the temple in Pol Pot time? Yes. Do you do merit exchange for your relatives? Do you go to the temple for this ritual? Yes. But could the bones of your relatives be in this new stupa, in this new monument? Yes, I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Would you go there to light incense? Because I don't even understand, I'm telling you, why they're not lighting incense, which is like a basic practice for the dead. Would you want to free the dead? She said, no. Why would I go there? Why not? I said, it would not work. And then I asked, why wouldn't it work? And her answer is fascinating. There are others there. Who would I be speaking to? Maybe others, maybe them. Why would others, not her family, bless me? So at this point, I realized, and then I spoke with monks who are theologians, that there is no collective memory in Cambodia. That for them, you exchange with the dead, that's your family. The other bones of the dead who are not family do not interest them. They have no moral obligation, or if you would like, religious obligation to bless or have an exchange with non-family dead. And of course, I asked them, should they be cremated? And she said yes. She can't take them out and cremate. She's not sure her family is there. So again, I just end quickly. Who wants us, the tourists, to see? Because obviously this site is for tourists. I could also ask, maybe the Cambodians should see, might see, but I have not found that anyone beyond rhetoric for the NGO, for the global community, that anyone wants them to see. So this is just another really difficult example of a stupa with an actual inside where we could move around. And this is my tuk-tuk driver who has never seen a bone up close before, and he's fascinated by this. And this stupa was stuck in the middle of construction. You could see it's sacrilegious. The bones are just, anyone can touch them. And why? And this is a fascinating answer. In Khmer, on the wall, you see that an ex-Khmer Rouge governor of the area built this stupa. And at some point, he just stopped paying. Now, I discovered through this story, no one wanted to tell me in the village why he stopped building it or why he built it at all, because usually NGOs build it. The answer was that the Cambodian government asked politicians who were ex-Khmer Rouge to build stupas as part of 3 agendas. First, to improve their karma after their sins. Second, to improve reconciliation in the village. And third, everyone gets kickbacks, including the one who built it, but obviously something went wrong. This is me with my first informant on your left and 2 Buddhist monks. And the reason I always show this at the end of the talk is because I think it's amazing that these 2 Buddhist monks, I came there naive in my first visit saying, but everybody's telling me that you have to cremate. Isn't that Buddhism? Isn't that the rule? And nobody's coming here. So can you explain why you have bones on display when everyone has to be cremated? So I asked, why are the bones here? And the monk number 1 says, we dug them up so you can see. So you can see. So me, I'm the foreigner. Why do I need to see? To believe the evil that happened. Could you put a picture? I asked. Why do I need to put bones that need to be cremated? And the monk laughs and he says, picture may not be true. Okay, may not be real. So then I said, I read that bones are dangerous for Buddhists. And the monk number 1 says, we bless them now, they're not dangerous. The souls are free. So here you have like a reform practice of a new Buddhism, that everything's okay. And this man, the monk, is sitting with 2 new phones, iPhones, where Buddhist monks are supposed to be like modest people with no material, whatever. And he's sitting with the 2 bones, but he's blessed them. Do the villagers come here to give offerings, the merit exchange? No, we give it to them. No people come. And this is the red that's important to me. Monk number 2, who's very, very young, who doesn't know he shouldn't tell me, tells me the preta, the evil spirits, the dangerous spirits of the dead who died badly, came after we found the bones. We put the bones back in the ground, then we dig again to put them on the shelf. But then the dangerous preta came again. The village complained that people were getting sick because of the preta. There was fighting in the village. We put it back in the ground. The village head, who's a party member, says you must take them back and put it back in the stupa. We did. We blessed them. No spirits. And then the monk number 1 says, yes, yes, no spirits. So I call this bone business. I mean, it's a harsh term, but this is more data. You're welcome to read my paper of how Cambodian young man used the term bone business. When I asked him, can you tell me why you have these bones here? So he said to me, there's no such a thing as collective memory for the genocide dead in Cambodia. This is all business. Big people, elites, are making money from the dead. So I think I've pretty much covered everything. And I'm just ending with Singh's wagon. And I would say the wagon is empty. So who is progressing? You have some people who are making money, and you have European, primarily German, Australian NGOs who think that they are spreading pedagogy that's preventing genocide when they're actually not, because the dead are not present for the Cambodians, but only for the foreigner who knows nothing about Buddhist culture. That's it. I think I will stop here because it's late.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I leave my conclusions. Should I maybe just define, maybe somebody asked me about perfect failure and I'll define it.
Yeah, I think it's better for this part to have the audience. Maybe the
Okay.
Yes. So please press the escape button.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so
yeah.
Yes, so now we are here. So now we had some time for questions and comments, and I will be very happy to gather some questions and comments from people who are here on site, but also from our online participants. So if you have questions, wonderful. Please raise your hands, and I can see that we already have first volunteers to comment on the fascinating lecture we just had the opportunity to listen to. What I may only say as a, let's say, starting point for our discussion is that I suppose that, of course, it will be a simplification, but I would say that what we were listening about was on this, let's say, tension between this local conditions of memory and non-memory and forgetting on the one hand, and this universalizing Euro-Western genocide and memory discourse that seems like something that comes as an obligatory thing in memory studies, for instance.
Duty memory.
Yes. And I think that's what brings us to our topic of, let's say, decolonizing forms of memory and commemoration, and the context of East-Central Europe in particular, because we may also ask about this let's say, global or maybe Western forms of memory and commemoration, and their, let's say, fitting into many other contexts in many parts of the world. So I suppose we may have many questions about it, and I will be very observant about your comments. And now we have already two speakers waiting for the opportunity to comment on Karol Kidron's lecture. And the first of our online guests is Erika Lehrer, I suppose.
Oh, Erika.
So Erika, the floor is yours.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Hey, Erika.
Okay. Hi, Carol. It's so nice to see you. I always love
Erica.
You can't see me. Unfortunately, I just came down with COVID for the first time last night, so I'm not going to show my face. I always love hearing about your work, and this is no exception. I had a lot of thoughts, and I feel like I sort of had two areas of questioning in general, although you started to kind of move in this direction in the later part of your talk. But I was sort of wondering a little more specifically about the history of the sites, sort of whose idea they were. I mean, I know with like S21 that apparently, if I remember correctly, that the person who designed it actually visited in the 1970s Auschwitz as a model, so there is, for sure, there's evidence of this kind of really borrowing from Holocaust memory. And I also wondered about sort of other forms of working through, everything from like public trials to private rituals, and kind of where the monuments sit, within this larger landscape. But I think maybe the question that I wanted to ask, I wondered just maybe a little bit provocatively, like, if you're kind of maybe setting up a bit of a straw man by talking about this sort of tradition, the successful tradition in the West that's being imported. And I'm kind of just wondering, like, how organic do you think this Western Holocaust model is that is being imported or imposed, however you want to see it, whether it's embraced or not? Because, of course, there's so much talk about like a Holocaust industry and so much about the sort of performativity of Holocaust museums and memorials, which like you said at some point, something about, how we in the West use these sites and museums. And I think there's a real lack in visitor studies. I don't actually think we know so well how people use and experience Holocaust museums. And I think people, just even from my own experience, I think people do that very differently, and maybe not in the ways that we think. So I just maybe wanted to challenge you a little bit on the idea that somehow there's this Western model that both works and even that it's successful, and that we even know how it works, and that you're sort of counterposing with this Cambodian model.
Right.
Thank you.
Fantastic, Erica, as always. We always discuss, argue at conferences, but it's been a while. Okay. Work. Okay, so I just quickly, who designed it? Basically, it's very important, as you said, like some digging, the first stupa archetype that you saw here at the Killing Fields was a Vietnamese architect who built and designed it. And he designed it after speaking, to Holocaust museologists, and I maybe Erica, you know this better than I do. I don't remember if it's German, Polish, but the idea was that he particularly asked how would a perpetrator represent the past in a way that would show acknowledgement and for some kind of apologetic, and also to create new links to the global community after being a perpetrator. But of course, the politics of Vietnam was also to purify themselves, right? Sanitize their own actions. But what's interesting is that I've struggled for years to understand who designed the later stupas after this first archetype. And I received two answers. Basically, everywhere including the culture ministry, including NGO, Cambodians working in NGO, ordering these monuments. They all told me, we looked at the one in the killing fields, that's the way it's done, we do what's done. In other words, there's a model set up, and that's what they chose to do. That's one answer. The other answer is that the Watson Wrong model that I finally was able to find the designer, who is a Cambodian school teacher who worked for Youth for Peace, if I'm not mistaken, and UNICEF. He told me that he and his nephew, who now lives in Australia, built this monument, designed it themselves. It's so special. It's so much more interesting. Of course, it's similar to the archetype, but they're very excited about the idea of the relief. His nephew speaks English. He translated the texts. But I want to say here that that model, to me, has basically many of the problems that the other original archetype had. So that's the only history of the design that I was able to understand. So that's the one answer. So is the Western model really organic? So here, I think I would disagree with you a little bit, but not a lot, what you're implying. So basically, again, my answer is more meta-theoretical and not about visitor studies. What is the amount, what is the percentage of visitors who find Holocaust sites very meaningful, okay? My answer would be, in my view, that the concept of humanistic, liberal perspectives of cosmopolitanism, cosmopolitan memory, is organic in the sense of how Western cultures perceive memory as making a difficult past present, honoring the past, and even thinking of it as somewhat sacred and a duty memory. So for sure, modern memory commemoration is based on this perception we have, which I am included, that we do have an obligation to visit sites, to make the past present, honor the dead, and also to restore our identification with certain values, right, of what's right and wrong. And there is this sense that we share something, especially based on discourse on victimhood and subjugation and acknowledgement, testimony, and the value of that. And going to these sites of memory is an act of some kind of self-pedagogy of this identification, you know, so that in my sense, in my view at least, they work organically in that sense. That doesn't mean that there isn't a politics of memory of governments and engineers of memory who are imposing certain narratives about the meaning of identification, about the meaning of peace and reconciliation. But that's all of, you know, what we know about social life, that it is always some kind of combination of what comes from above and what people feel from below. So I think here this is a very complicated answer that some of you may not accept, but as I said this morning, I feel that governmental imposed narratives, in my view, do not work unless we're talking about, you know, non-democratic societies. They don't work like a marketing effort unless there's a hook below. In other words, good politicians understand what their population believes in, becomes identified with, becomes angry about, can be stirred. What is the glue of memory work? So for me, in the West, at least in the democratic West, imposed national narratives hook on to organic memory work or organic sense of memory? And if so, for my answer is, does the Western model work, Erica? I think it does, but I think there are a lot of moral dilemmas about certain meta messages that we, what I consider construction, right? I mean, we need to be critical, which is what I say in every narrative, every lecture. We need to be critical of the way narratives are constituting the way we feel about the past. But there are some very awful. I mean, I use this example in, an Israeli example. Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel uses Iran, Palestinian questions in every Holocaust memorial event. And absolutely, it's organic because he's picking up on Jewish paranoia, fear, security dilemmas, some of which are very real. And at the same time, it is absolutely imposing a perspective and not constructing or supporting alternative ones, which are also organic. But all politicians do that. They choose. So my opinion is they work. I don't believe all of them should work as well as they happen to. And the last question is lack of visitor studies, Erica. I would say I agree that there are not a lot of good ones, but if you look at tourism journals, good tourism journals, I don't like them because I'm not a quantitative scholar, but there are tons and tons and tons of visitor studies in tourism studies that try to explore affect. And I mean, there's some good works actually. I mean, I'm sure you know on heritage and affect, and they do try to understand visitor response. So I don't know. I mean, I'm critical, as you are, of some of these studies, but I think I was more responding to the fact that in Cambodia, because of, in my view, the politics of memory and the interest of NGO to maintain these stupas and this memory work, I think there we don't have visitor studies. That's my view. I don't know if I took me a long time.
So much.
Thank you, Erica.
Thank you so much.
Be well.
And the second comment or set of questions comes from Adam Ostrowski. Adam, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a very rich, inspiring and illuminating piece of research.
Thank
you. And yet I have three comments. Three comments that may be reframed as questions, but that's up to you.
Yeah.
First, regarding Buddhism and Cambodian culture, I think that, of course, as ethnographer, you are very aware of it, but perhaps a reader of your text may be not as aware of the fact that Buddhism is not as culture bound as most Western religions, and in particular as Judaism, or for that matter, as Hinduism. Like in every Buddhist country, there is a different Buddhist culture. Yeah. And these layers are blended. So it's correct to analyze them together. But on the other hand, analytically, it's also worthwhile to make the distinction in some contexts. For example, if you look at this memory issue, we can take the Dhammapada, which is the common Buddhist text for all traditions, but written in Pali, so used widely in Cambodia. And on the very first page, you find actually a caution against dwelling on your own victimhood. It's like the earliest critique of the victimhood culture that you can think of. Yeah. Look how he abused me. If you think this way, you will always live in hatred. Look how he abused me. If you abandon such thoughts, you will be free from hatred. You will live in peace. So that's the Buddhist part. And I think it may be at work in the context that you described. And of course, there is this whole bone issue, which I think is more Cambodian than Buddhist, because I'm not saying it's not true Buddhist. That would be a very brutal thing to say. But I believe that before Buddhism, it's very likely that the Cambodians had a very similar relationship with bones. And if they, in an alternative scenario, became Christians, it's still very likely that their relationship with bones would remain exactly as you described it. Maybe they would use different words. So that's one thing. The second thing is this global culture. I think that we need to provincialize this global and to say that this understanding of memory as a safeguard against cruelty is a very Jewish thing. It's gone global, but it's really deeply rooted in the Torah, in remember what the Amalek did to you, in remember how you were slaves in Egypt, so that you do not oppress the strangers, because you yourselves were the strangers in the Mitzrayim. And there is another promise in this, another promise that if you remember how you were victimized, you will not victimize others. So to me, I would say it's not so much, well, I'm not undermining your reading, but I would read it alternatively, not so much as a tension between global and local, but as a tension between two hypotheses. One is the hypothesis that if we let go of the past, we will become more compassionate towards the other. And the other hypothesis would be that if we remember the past, we become more compassionate towards the other. Empirically speaking, and on the collective level, if we look at the world around, we may say that both hypotheses are wrong. Definitely, the nations that dwell on their own victimization are not gentle towards the other, but the nations that forget and let go of the past are neither gentle towards the other. But perhaps there is something with this hypothesis that may be true in some context, and to me it would be interesting to explore them as two ways of dealing with the past that are neither global nor local, but are just two possibilities that are in our common human repertory. And my third remark is off topic, but because I've already reframed the whole issue in religious terms, so I just make the step further. I think that there is a very interesting experiment in combining these two approaches, the Jewish and the Buddhist sensibility towards the past. And if you look at the books by Ellen Corman Mines, like Buried Rivers, or Louis Steinman, Crooked Mirror, it's actually both are born of this Buddhist and Jewish encounter, but it happened in the West, not in the Far East.
Absolutely.
So these are my three comments that if you want, you may reframe them as questions. If you don't, then just we can leave it at that. Once again, thank you for very rich lecture and very inspiring research. I really do admire it a lot.
Thank you so much. I would like very much to answer. Are we okay with time or no?
Yes, we have time until 7.
Okay, amazing.
So still got time, I suppose, for a question or two and for your answer to Adam. Thank you again, Adam, for your research.
Okay, I will try very hard not to do this quickly. So absolutely, I agree. Thank you for, it is not Buddhism is unique everywhere. So as I spoke about this morning, in Cambodia, as I think you probably know, Buddhism is syncretized with an animist history. And what I think is most interesting about the bones and about death in general is that animism calls for a disintegration of materiality, and Cambodian animist Buddhism leaves remains in nature to disintegrate. So that apparently I was told that in ancient Cambodia, you left the dead outside. And even after the genocide, if it was not your family member, you threw the dead into the river, and they would be said to disintegrate because you're not permitted in any case to cremate someone that is not your family. So I absolutely agree. And I would say, first, if you're interested and you don't know her work, Angie Liu has a fascinating paper on animism and Buddhism in Cambodia. Angie Liu, you can contact me if you want the name of the paper. So she speaks about the mines. There's a huge question in Cambodia. Why do Cambodians not allow human rights workers to come in and take out the mines from the war left over? People lose legs and they're not letting them in. So apparently she claims, she's been living in Cambodia for 30 years now. She's French originally. So she claims that there's a new syncretic Buddhist interpretation of the mines, that they see the mines as an object that disintegrates in their land and it blesses their agriculture, and the spirits of the land want these mines. So I take issue with some of this interpretation, but that is her provincialized reading of why human rights is failing in Cambodia. And like me, I was very excited to hear she's very critical of all intervention in Cambodia. And in a way, her ideal image, this is to answer the conversation this morning, is to allow Cambodia to be the romantic, pre-modern, primordial Buddhist past and to evolve any way it wants. So that's one. And thank you for your not to dwell on victimhood, fascinating, and I will look that up because I didn't know that sentence. I know there's no time for this, but I would love to hear more of what you say about bones. There was a fascination with bones in Cambodia. So just an anecdote in keeping with this, in Cambodia, when I thought I figured everything out, and bones are dangerous and everyone has to be cremated, I noticed that young people are wearing bones on their necklace, very beautifully in gold. And I asked them, oh my God, why, what is this? And they said grandfather, mother, brother. And then of course it became a big question of, wait a minute, if it's dangerous, why are you wearing a bone? And then I said, oh my God, maybe I'm all wrong because they're not afraid of bones and bones are Cambodian and it's okay. And I lost lost. And the explanation was, if it's your family, and here we go back to the emphasis on private family memory, the bones are powerful, but they don't hurt you if they're your family bones. And if the body has been cremated, you're allowed to take out pieces of bone from the cremation. So I don't know if you've read Eric Davis's book, Death Power. It was mind-blowing for me, and he talks about a little bit about the bones, but more about Cambodian perceptions of death and power. And just to show a distorted NGO, German NGO, GIZ perspective. So this is, I think, I'm not sure in my paper, I think it is, where when I say, why are you spending money building stupas that nobody is interested in, and your wife is Cambodian, you've been living here for 20 years, don't you know they need to cremate? Why are you paying for stupas with bones on display? And his answer was, don't you know Cambodians are fascinated with bones? Don't you know they're fascinated with death? This is what they want. So then again, I understood he didn't understand. I understood this was a reductionist and perhaps racist, stigmatic question, which I didn't have time to say, but I want to emphasize that in the reviewers of my paper, one of the basic questions that they all asked was, in keeping with what I was saying, how is it that in the former Yugoslavia, bones were not put on display for genocide prevention? Why is it in other post-conflict societies there wasn't a demand to put victim bones on display, but you have victim bodies on display in Rwanda and in Cambodia? So I asked, the NGO person, and the answer is they're fascinated with death, so bones fascinate them. So that's why I'm interested in what you said, because maybe there's something that I don't, and I'm still looking for answers. Global culture, I will say something that maybe a Jewish person shouldn't say. I don't think dwelling for Jews, or maybe Jewish Israelis, but we understand Jewish memory, Amalek. I don't think Jews perceive the emphasis on memory as being compassionate to others. This isn't a political statement about Israeli politics. It is just what I understand about the call for Jewish memory religiously. It's about the dead. It's about the message of the event and the search for a homology, a pattern that will repeat itself. Learn about Amalek so it never happens again. This is how we can keep the redemptive narrative going. This is how we survive. Of course, this has evolved, yeah. But I agree with you 100% that memory should be provincialized. And I absolutely think that neither of these work. And I believe that it means it is something that we all share in common because we're human. And I'm fascinated with this question of compassion, because I wonder if that could be a Christian understanding, or at least this compassion for others through memory. It reminds me of more 19th, 20th century uses of memory and humanitarianism, which I think is more Christian in its perspective than Jewish. And memory and representation would imply of victims would imply that we are compassionate. And for some reason, if I think about Yad Vashem and other Israeli sites of memory, or even Jewish memory, I feel it's more the Jewish obsession with the patterns of history, death, and loss, and keeping our contract with God of what is supposed to happen eventually at the end of time, and less about compassion for the other, because I think the collective Jewish memory has never been about the individual dead. And you see this in Israel, that the collective dead, the beautiful concept of, in Hebrew, there's a word, soldiers who fall are called halal, which is void, like for culture study, big word. So they are voids in the collective. So we remember them because they have created holes in the collective. So it's not about the fallen soldier and remembering him. It's filling the void that he has left behind and honoring the sacrifice to the collective. So, but these are amazing. This is an amazing conversation. And I have to think more about this provincialization and also these 2 points, and about Christian memory, which I don't know enough about. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please do let me know if you have more questions and comments, and I mean our on-site and online guests at the same time. Building on what Erika and Adam quite provocatively brought to understand, I'm still wondering about this let's say, Western or Euro-Western memory model, and it's what does it work or doesn't it work? And I will give the floor to Zuzanna Bogumił, a colleague who is waiting for the chance to speak in a second. But I just wanted to finish a sentence and. Oh my!
No,
It's fine now. Okay, it's only about the screen. Okay.
Oh, it's a touch screen.
Yes, it's a touch screen. Yes. So okay. So Karina, thank you for saving us from this. Let's say blackout that our screen was supposed to give us. So I'm still thinking about how your research challenges and questions these general premises, but also like promises of memory discourse and memory studies. I mean, these things that we have already discussed in the morning, like how we are taught that we should commemorate, and then we will be able to reconcile, and then we will be able to live peacefully. So we can hope for a better future, maybe also with compassion towards the others to make a link to what Hannah said.
Yeah.
And your research shows that it does not apply in the Cambodian case. And I wonder, where does it apply actually? Because I suppose we can give you some quite good examples about this Euro-Western model not being not so appropriate in the context of East-Central Europe and Eastern Europe, for instance. And we can also question whether this model works for Israel, for instance, in terms of all these promises that it made. So maybe when Erika mentioned that we lack visitor studies, maybe we lack something like memory user studies to be able to know how this Euro-Western global model work, if it works at all. How should we understand its functioning? Because these, let's say, optimistic assumptions probably are not the case. So it was more like a comment than a question, and I don't want to make our.
So if there's time, I would like.
Okay, thank you so much. But we will just now give the floor to Zuzanna, who is a religious scholar from Warsaw and a colleague of ours. Zuzanna, nice to have you. Hello.
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me well?
Yes, very well.
Yeah. I'm in the kitchen making dinner to my kids. Sorry. It was fascinating, and I really like your papers, and it's really super. I wanted to give you only a short to add some example to make you thinking more, and probably in the future to have more contact. So I'm in general, I make my research on memory of Soviet repressions. This is my main focus of interest. So what we could see in the past, that there were some people, mostly from the Memorial Society, who really wanted to transmit the model of the memory of the Holocaust to Russia. They haven't managed to do it. We see what is going on. We have war, but they were also like some local activists, mostly the church, the Russian Orthodox Church, but also, some other people who were educated and grew up in the Soviet culture of memory and the Soviet culture of dealing with and living with the dead, who also were engaged. So it was like you could see, but you could also see a huge, let's say, a huge protest against this Holocaust memory, that it doesn't suit him here, and it is and probably mostly because it comes from the memorial, and memorial is like connected with the West, so it is imposed. Yeah, but that was my first thing. And now, because I this year I made my research in Mongolia, and Mongolia is super interesting. There was also Soviet repressions. It is the country which went after the communism. they went through democratic, they have democratic revolution, and really they came to democracy by themselves. So nobody, it is somewhere, you know, the country between Russia and China, nobody is interested in this country. They slowly work with a memory of repressions because there were also a lot of dead. It was also the revolution was against the lamas and this former like group. And what I discovered, there is a lot of, I call them the secular agents, mostly connected with the government. They make these books of memory and so on. But there are also lamas, and there is Lama Buttevator, who is well known in the West because of his thinking about Buddhism, and he also make the same. So what I wanted to say is that it is fascinating how the memory is traveling. So it is a guy who doesn't speak Russian, English, and even if he was several times interviewed by the Germans, it is absolutely not this cultural group which is interested for them. But he speaks Korean and Japanese. And through Korean Buddhism, he learned about Cambodia genocide and the way that lamas in Cambodia deal with the past, and he decided to transmit it to Mongolia. So when they discovered one of the killing sites, he collected these bones, and there were two things. So first, one thing is that he is still like having schools of few hundred schools because he is now constructed the Buddhist temple where he wants to put these schools, like thinking about what happened in Cambodia and mostly reflecting of their commemoration, and he wants to make something absolutely new. But on the other hand, he like he explains that, you know, bones were burned, and of these bones were made small stupa, which were put to the big stupa, and now you have also the monument. And next to this monument, there will be this temple. He got the agreement from the government, which in the same time is absolutely against this kind of commemoration, because there is this conflict between religious memory and the forensic approach and the evidences, and that you have to have this thing. So I think it is super interesting, and your like researches are very helpful for me to understand what is going on. But it is also super interesting when we see how these memories are traveling, yeah. And what is absolutely visible for me in Mongolia is that, you know, sorry, but Holocaust is unknown. They are simply, it is like, maybe they know that something like that happened, but it is absolutely not the event and the memory and the history which is constructive for the identity and thinking about the past. So that's what I think is also like very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I learned a lot from your example from Mongolia. I must look this up. Thank you so much, Art. So you are writing about this Mongolian case, yeah? About this traveling.
Yeah, so I was on the, you know, it was how to say, it was pilot research. I don't speak Mongolian, and it's a big problem. But I hope that I will, because I have a huge project, and which was on Russia, but I can't do it in Russia. So I have idea to put this project to Mongolia and to Kazakhstan, because in Kazakhstan it is also very interesting. They are also dealing with this past. They are mostly Muslims, and for the Muslims and nomads. And it was also very, you know, when you find such places, yes, like you have to deal with these places, and it is super interesting how Muslims deal with it. On the other hand, there was also the Holodomor, like in Ukraine, and you don't have bodies of that genocide because these bodies were left in the steppe, and there is no bones there, and there is no this evidence, and it is also a problem. So it is so I am like starting, let's say, the project, but I have a lot of, you know, thoughts about it, and a lot of let's say ethnographic observations from my field research this year in Kazakhstan and Mongolia.
It's very interesting. So maybe I say something quickly.
So now,
I think
final comment by
Yeah.
Carol
Yeah,
Kidron,
sorry, I'm
just
sure everyone is totally finished for the day. Yeah, so I mean, I think for what, Maria, what you said, and I can use the example from Susanna, that I think we have to ask ourselves what work we want memory to do for us.
Mhm.
And there's an amazing paper by Michael Schutzen on distorted memory. Most of the book is about psychology, about Watergate and other communications examples of memory work. But he has this wonderful term, distorted memory, and he lists the ways in which memory is instrumentalized or put to work. So I think that the first task of any memory scholar who works in especially a very politically intense culture or nation is to understand what work it does. Yeah, what do the people using memory, imposing memory on others, but also organically building an alternative, it must do work for them. So for me, if it is imposed for political reasons, for example, to receive acknowledgement, to receive funding, to receive global support capital, but also to prove to the world that repression has taken place and someone has been silenced, that's the political work that it's doing. But then the question is, who is determining the work it should do? So it's the classic anthropological question, what is the job being done, but who determined the project? So here, which of the Mongolian people or politicians or freedom fighters chose a certain model to do the work for them? So I think that's one question. But then the second question, also related, is, like Erica's question and yours. So the model might just be copied, like what you said about the stupa or the remains, because someone has decided that it worked and it worked well. But my critique deep down is, in one sentence, that my concern is that when memory travels because it works financially or politically, it may be totally disconnected from the everyday lives of the people who have an emotional, physical, genetic history with these bones or with these remains. So for me, there are ethical questions of the use of remains or the narratives. I mean, it doesn't have to be the remains. It's that people are enlisting what might be private, communal, familial to do a certain political job or financial job or global job. So this to me is my personal question, but there's so much work to do. Do we want to unlearn, as you say? Yeah.
So,
okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was intense, I suppose, and we are left with even more questions and issues to learn and unlearn, I suppose. So please do follow our next emails, and we invite everyone to our subsequent meetings. Thank you so much for tonight.
This was, fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you.